So,
okay, good. All right, that's.
So I just want to introduce Tristram Hooley, who's kindly agreed to deliver this workshop for us. He's the Chief Research Officer at the Institute for Student Employers. He's also Professor number 2 for the Inland University and the Applied Sciences, and also he's a Professor of Career Education for ISICs. I'm going to ask if you can ensure that you keep your microphones turned off to minimise noise when Tristram's speaking. And this workshop will be filmed, so if you don't want to be shown on camera, please just keep your camera switched off. Tristram has said that it will be okay to ask questions when he ends at each section. So when he ends, if you have a question to ask, please do ask him. This is a really interesting presentation, so be sure to interact with Tristram. So over to you, Tristram.
Great. Okay, well, thank you for having me. I'm going to just share my slides here. And I'm going to talk about this, which you asked me to talk about, which was about social justice. I've been doing quite a lot of work on that, so I'm going to sort of give you a bit of some thoughts about that. I'm going to talk a bit about policy and politics and end up with a bit about practice as well, really. So that's kind of where I'm going to go. So yeah, if people switch their mics off, that would be helpful. And then I'll see if we've got anyone who needs to be muted here. That's it. Right. Great. Okay. You should be able to unmute yourself. And yeah, as Emma says, really, we're going to kind of pick up some questions. So we'll stop for some questions. You can throw stuff into the chat and I'll try and pick it up as we go. I'm going to sort of pause at the end of each section, and then we can have a bit of a discussion about what we talked about if we want. And hopefully there'll be a bit of time at the end. We've got a reasonable amount of time today. So I'm going to start with our definition of career guidance, which comes from the book that I did with my colleagues Ronald Sultana and Rhea Thompson, who I've worked with quite a lot. So Ronald's in the University of Malta, which is a very nice place to go to if you ever get to go to Malta. And then Rhea's in Aarhus University, which actually, her campus is actually in Copenhagen, which again is a very nice place to go. But as I don't get to go anywhere anymore because I'm locked down, we have to talk, all of us, by Zoom all the time. So that's what we do all the time, isn't it? These days, it's just be on Zoom. But what we tried to do in those books that we did was to try and talk a bit about career guidance, and really to think about, well, what is its relationship to social justice? And we've got people who write in these books who come out at it from all different angles, but we tried to then pull out some key findings, and I'm going to sort of start with this one and finish with another one, which is a sort of model for practice, really. But what we said here is career guidance supports individuals and groups to discover more about work, leisure and learning, and to consider their place in the world and plan for their future. Career guidance can take a wide range of forms and draws on diverse theoretical traditions, but at its heart, it is a purposeful learning opportunity which supports individuals and groups to consider and reconsider work, leisure and learning in the light of new information and experiences, and to take both individual and collective action as a result of this. Well, you've probably heard lots of definitions of career guidance in the past. This one's very influenced by quite a lot of them, particularly by the OECD definition. And so there's a couple of things that I think are really important about the OECD. There we go, we've got somebody not muted. Let's see if we can find out who they are. There we go, right, great. So yeah, what the OECD definition of career guidance reminds us is that career guidance is not just one-to-one career counselling, or what in the Gatsby benchmarks they call personal guidance. It's not just those face-to-face, one-to-one relationships, but it also can be careers education. It can be employer engagement supported by professionals. It can be online, it can be telephone based. So career guidance is all of these different interventions that you can do to help somebody to develop their career. And what we've added to that really in this is a couple of things. So the first is we've really pulled out the fact that it's not just about paid work. So when we're talking about career, we're not just talking to people about their paid work, because you can't really talk about paid work without also talking about how you're going to spend the rest of your time when you're not at paid work. How do you combine that with your learning? How do you combine that with your leisure? How do you combine that with your family life and your role in the community and so on? So we've really tried to bring that to the fore and say career is how an individual organizes their life, how they interact with the world. And the other thing that we've tried to do is say, well, we're not individuals only. Of course, we are individuals, but we're also working groups. We don't normally work entirely by ourselves. We work with other people and we pursue our careers with other people. And sometimes it's useful for us to think about how we can advance our position in our career, not just individually. So I get a pay rise, but also collectively. So, the firm does really well, so we all get a pay rise. So in this definition, what we're trying to do is to broaden the definition of career, keep the definition of career guidance pretty broad, pretty wide as well, but also to say it's not just an individual thing, it's about the relationship between you, the people around you, your family, your community, and ultimately your society. So that's how we're trying to define career guidance here. So there's a really interesting article that I'm going to show you the website that we've got that supports a lot of this stuff. But one of my colleagues, Pete Robertson, who's in Edinburgh Napier University, he wrote a really good article where he said, essentially what good does career guidance do for public good, for the societal good? And he said, well, it helps support the economy, the education system, and supports social aims. So that might be things like social inclusion, social mobility, we're going to talk about in a bit. And that's I suppose traditionally what we've always seen as being the main kind of goals of career guidance, public policy goals. That it supports the economy, it supports the education system, it supports sort of social inclusion, social mobility. He says, well, it actually also helps health and well-being. So if you have career guidance and it's working effectively, then people are making choices that are supportive of good mental health. They're getting themselves out of dangerous situations where they might be experiencing either physical dangers or mental dangers or whatever. So there's that benefit. It also adds some environmental benefits. It helps people to think through their relationship with the natural environment and potentially to respond to some of the challenges that are coming as the economy shifts in the light of global warming. And then what he calls peace and justice goals, which I think can be really important, if you've been in a period of conflict. So if you think about, a country that's just emerging from a war, there's lots and lots of career decisions, labour market decisions that people are going to make. But we could also apply some of that to issues of justice. Things like rehabilitation after people have been in prison and that kind of thing. And broadly, there's a point that, if people are in good, well-paying jobs that are satisfying to them, they're less likely to turn to crime and so on. So Pete says, well, career guidance is basically good. It's bound up with societal goals, which have a lot of relationship to social justice. And that's useful because mainly how career guidance is paid for is by governments paying for career guidance to achieve some of these different aims. Now, they're not always thinking of all of these things, but that's the kind of thing that they're trying to do. So that's a bit of background to it. So what I'm going to talk about in this session, I've really got sort of 5 things. So I'm going to talk a bit about social mobility. I'm going to talk a bit about where career guidance fits into that and some problems with that idea of social mobility, because I think social mobility is often where people start when they come at this idea of social justice. I'm then going to move on and think a bit about, well, what do we mean by social justice, a more expansive idea of social justice? And then I'm going to give you what we call our 5 signposts towards a socially just career guidance, which is a kind of a model for practice. And I'll stop at the end of each of these. And if people have got questions at that point, happy to pick them up then. So social mobility, it's a key concept for career guidance. It's one of the things that career guidance is supposed to often talked about as having contributing to. So what is social mobility? Well, social mobility is this idea that it's not where you come from, but it's where you are going that matters. And this is, we've got Ella Fitzgerald saying that because she's one of the coolest people I could find. So we thought we'd go with her. And so the idea of social mobility is that we shouldn't just live in a society where somebody's born rich and they stay rich, someone's born poor and they stay poor. There should be some sense in which society allows people to find their place in society according to their talents, their interests, their abilities. And that's really at the heart of career guidance, isn't it? Is that what we're trying to do is to help people figure out what's the best way for them to spend the time they have on this planet, and how can they use their talents, their interests, and so on. So social mobility says, it recognizes that often standing in the way of that aspiration are a series of inequalities, social inequalities, and it says we've got to do something about that. So the problem being that in the UK, we have, quite limited social mobility. I mean, we are socially mobile as a society. People do move up and down. Not everyone ends their life at the same level as they started it. But in general, if you look at people from a working class background, they're more likely to be unemployed. They're more likely to be paid below the living wage. They earn on average 24% less than their more advantaged peers. They're less likely to be in a professional job. So if we reject, and I do reject sort of kind of eugenic arguments for that says, well, poor people are poor because they're stupid and because their parents were stupid, and so there's will be people who argue that, but those arguments have been pretty solidly discredited. Most people would say, well, when you're born, you are potential. You're a huge amount of potential as a human being, as a baby, and it's the way that you're then socialized that limits that potential. Now, that's not to say that everybody is equally able to achieve everything if they were brought up the same way. We're all different. We all have different strengths and weaknesses. Some people are cleverer, some people are taller, some people are stronger, and so on. But there's an awful lot of the way in which that manifests in your life and your career that comes down to the circumstances in which you grow up. And so that's very challenging for us, because what we're saying is we're trying to do as careers people is to help people find where they want to be in society and the best way to make use of their talents. If there are all these barriers and obstacles that prevent it, that's a problem. So there are various things why we have these problems of social mobility. So sometimes people talk about sticky floors and sticky ceilings. So if you're very poor, it's really difficult to become very successful. There's all sorts of things that pull you back. The need to earn money, to earn a living makes it more difficult to focus on learning. We're seeing it really very clearly at the moment. So my kids, when they're in the pandemic, they've been sent home from school. Well, we've got computers or devices, at least for them to use to access learning. We've got a room, they've each got their own bedroom. They've got a good chance of being able to make the best of this situation. Now, in somebody who's from a less well-off background, they might not have computer devices to use. They might be trying to access their learning on their phone. They might be perhaps not have a space to work in. And that's true in all sorts of aspects of life. So the first thing is that if you're poor, there's lots of things that conspire to keep you poor. And the second thing, and in a way this is more important, is that if you're rich, there's a lot of things that try and stop you from becoming poor. So I went and spoke at the Headmasters Conference, which is the private school head teachers conference, right? And I went and talked about career guidance, but it was really interesting going because it's the top private schools. It's your Etons and your Harrows and those kind of places. And there was a charitable fund that people were all encouraged to give to when we did sort of social activities and stuff at the conference, which was about saying that if your parents lost their money while you were at private school, that this charitable fund would pay your fees through to the end of your private school. So if you started rich, you've got these advantages of going to a private school. And even if things went wrong for you, there were other people who were rich who were going to pitch in and make sure that you still kind of got the private education that someone like you they felt should have. So that's the idea of a sticky ceiling. They didn't want people who were like them, the kids in their schools, to fall down just because they didn't have enough money. And the same thing is true if once you get into your career, if you're from a rich background, you go and you try something out, you start up your own business, doesn't work out, you've still got lots of things to fall back on. You've got family that can help you and so on. So social mobility, there are problems at both ends of our societies that make social mobility less likely. One of the things that we notice is that people at the top, they're not complaining. They're not saying they want more social mobility, because the logic of that is that they would want more of their kids to end up poor. People at the bottom, they all say we want more social mobility. We want our kids to end up richer than we were. But people at the top don't say that. So we have to watch that, is that social mobility is, all politicians would say it's a lovely, good thing, but in fact, not everybody is equally committed to it, I think. So everybody loves social mobility. If you ask politicians, it's motherhood and apple pie. They're absolutely in favour of it. And if you go in the Conservative Party, you'll find someone like Robert Halfon, who I've often got a lot of time for, says a lot of things that I agree with. And he says, Conservative Party, we're all about social mobility. His thing that he always talks about is the Conservative Party is about giving people a ladder out of poverty, a ladder up. And that's what we're all about. So he's really very much a campaigner for social mobility. And in the Labour Party, we had Tony Blair, and Tony Blair, although I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, he was, I think, a tremendous speechwriter, and he often put things into words extremely well. And so he says, well, the essence of what we were about was to lift people out of poverty, transform their horizons, aspirations, and hopes, give people the skills they need, better jobs, give them the chance to save and build up a nest egg. And this is, he then talks explicitly about social mobility here. So, and a lot of that stuff will be very familiar to people who are involved in career guidance. You'll recognize a lot of this rhetoric. It's stuff that we use as well, about helping people to achieve, even to overcome the barriers that they face and so on. So putting it simply, pretty much all political parties agree that government should try and make sure that where you come from does not determine where you can go in life. And that's the idea of social mobility. So I'll just pause there. Don't know whether there are any questions so far, and we're going to go on and think about where does career guidance fit into that idea of social mobility already, but I don't know whether anyone's got any thoughts so far. Just trying to see whether I can see there. Nothing in the chat, I don't think. Have we got? No. So I will push on, and we'll perhaps have a chance to talk about it later. So where does career guidance fit into all of this? Well, career guidance is actually very useful for people who are interested in social mobility because it shows us new horizons. It gives us a kind of map as to how we can go forward, provides help, mentoring and support, and bridges us to our next step. That's what career guidance is about. That's what it's doing. And so that's all ideal for social mobility because it's about getting people to think about things that they might not have thought about otherwise. And so in a report that I did for the Sutton Trust a few years ago, we said, look, there's a number of things that career guidance can do, which we explicitly think can have a relationship to social mobility. So It provides access to information and intelligence about the labour market and learning market in ways that transcend existing social networks. So you don't have to know someone who's a lawyer in order to find out about how the law works as a labour market. And that's the next point as well, is demystifying labour and learning market systems. So you might, as a young person, you might think, well, there's no way I could ever go to university. I couldn't even understand how you'd apply or anything like that. Well, if you provide people with career guidance, it helps them to understand, it demystifies it. But we're also doing something more fundamental with people than just giving them information. We're engaging with their assumptions about themselves and the world around them. We're challenging them. We're saying, you really should think about this. You might not have thought about it, but perhaps you should think about it. And we're saying that we want to listen to their aspirations. We want to help them operationalize that, even if they aren't absolutely sure that they can do that. We want to help people to build the skills that they need to make decisions and transitions and progress in their career. Well, that's what we call career management skills. And then we can also help to broker people access to networks beyond the ones that they normally have access to. So a lot of the employer engagement stuff that we often talk about as being an important part of careers programs is absolutely about that. It's about giving people access to a world that they otherwise wouldn't be able to get into. So if I'm from a well-off background, or even not, forget wealth for a minute, even if you just think, well, look, if I'm from a medical background, if I'm a doctor, my kids decide they want to become doctors, they're going to find it really easy to talk to more doctors, to meet people, to get opportunities, to do work experience and so on. If you're somebody who doesn't have anything to do with the medical world, then it's really going to be very difficult for you to do those things. Career guidance and employer engagement activities can help us to overcome that. And then we can also provide mentoring and support. We encourage persistence, help people to be resilient. We've all probably had students who've applied for jobs, or clients who've applied for jobs who haven't got it, they're really disappointed. Well, if we push them, if we encourage them, then they can achieve. So career guidance in all of these ways is directly overcoming advantages that certain people have in the labour market, where they already have access to information, already have access to support, already have access to mentoring and so on. We provide that for everyone. It's a universal provision. And there's increasing evidence for this impact. So career guidance in the broader sense is good for everyone, but there's actually evidence that it's even better for those who don't have other forms of support. So my colleagues, Chris, Elnaz, Anthony Mann, they've all looked at these things quite a bit, and they've actually found quantitative differences. So basically, career guidance is good for everyone. If you give everyone career guidance, they do a bit better in life than they otherwise would have done. But if you give it to somebody who starts lower down, it pulls them up a bit further because there's no redundancy. So if I help to link someone to, that doctor example, if I help to link someone to a doctor through career guidance, through giving them a work experience placement, if they were already the child of a medical professional, then they probably could have found that another way. If they weren't, then that's additional benefit. And so it comes out as additional impact. So the case is, and I think we should stand on this, and we also should bear it in mind with our practice when we're thinking about what we're doing, is that if what we're interested in is giving people a better chance in life to achieve something other than live in the position where they first originally were born, and to work in the occupations their parents worked in and the people around them work in, then career guidance is absolutely about that. It's about broadening people's horizons and moving them on to do that. So, and we've got evidence that says that it works and that it actually achieves that. So that's one thing that we can really clearly claim, and we also can kind of bring into our practice in various ways. Any questions coming up yet? Chat, I've got one there. Yes, I'm going to be talking about social mobility, and I'm going to talk about social equality and social justice as an alternative way. So we'll go on and do that now. So I think despite the fact I've been sort of very glowing about social mobility, I'm going to say that there are a number of problems with it. So let's look at that. So the first problem is that there has not been an awful lot of progress on social mobility. So despite all governments and all political parties saying that they're very much in favour of it, there was a report that came out a few years ago which said after 2 decades of policy focus on social mobility, very little progress has been made. And you've got to wonder if everybody says it's so important and everybody keeps funding things, and yet there's still no real change. Perhaps we've got something wrong here. And COVID gives us another problem. Any progress that we might have made has probably been pushed backwards by COVID. So we've got serious challenges in our society at the moment where COVID is exacerbating inequality. I'm not going to talk about COVID. I've got lots to say on that in other contexts. So I'm not going to talk about that a lot, but I think it is a real problem if we're committed to social mobility at the moment. Now, I said all politicians agree with it. Of course, there's always exceptions, and in this case, it's probably not one that's completely surprising to you. So Jeremy Corbyn came out and said, actually, the idea of, well, probably around about the time when that report I just showed you came out, he said, well, this idea of social mobility is not such a good one. We actually want what he calls social justice. Now, everybody always said, as they always did when Corbyn said pretty much anything, oh, you know, Corbyn, he's crazy, he's talking rubbish, you know, what the hell, everyone loves social mobility. But what he was really driving at was in a situation where we promise people that people can go up in society. The consequence of that, if society isn't growing, if the economy isn't growing, and it hasn't really been growing since the crash of 2008, is that somebody else has got to come down. And as we've already talked about, rich people, advantaged people fight pretty hard to prevent themselves and their children from going down. And so actually trying to create a situation where everybody's moving around society more is actually very difficult. It's not as easy as people might think. And so Corbyn was probably onto something when he says we need a different way of thinking about that. So he says, well, not specifically Corbyn, but we get into the sort of territory where we start to think about theories of justice. What constitutes justice? And you know, there's lots of people who write about theories of justice, but you know, very simple discussion is: are we in favour of everyone having the same opportunity, or are we in favour of everyone getting the same outcome? So if I say we're in a society, everybody can go to university, and we're going to set up a system where everybody can go to university who has the grades to do it, we could say we've got equality of opportunity. But if we then say, well, but depending on which university you go to, which probably depends on which school you went to, you might end up with quite different outcomes. And people from more advantaged backgrounds tend to go to better universities and get better jobs at the end of it. So actually then there's an inequality in outcome, even though we've all had on paper the same opportunity. And this is not to say, I mean, both of these ideas I think are quite important and things we should think about in career guidance, but it's to recognize that there's more than one way to think about justice. And this cartoon, which you've probably seen before, gives another way of saying essentially the same thing. You know, if we give everyone equality, then you know, we give everyone the same things. You know, everyone's got a box to stand on, but for one kid here, that is of no use because he's too short and he can't see anyway, even though you stood him on a box. For another kid, it's no use because he was tall enough to see anyway, so it's no use to him. So it's only the kid in the middle that's really benefiting from that. If we have equity, which is more of an equality of outcomes idea, we say, well, you know, if you want to see over this fence, we need to distribute the resources in such a way as everyone can get benefit out of them. So it's a different way of thinking about it. And then they say, well, we also think about, well, why is there a fence there in the first place? Why are there these barriers here? Is there anything we could do that's more structural that might change society? So we start to get into some really kind of philosophical and political territory about what is different outcomes. Now, as ever is the case in my work anyway, when I start to look into one of these things, I always find that Tony Watts went there about 20 years before I did. And he says, well, career guidance, this matters, all of this stuff about philosophy, because career guidance, career education guidance is profoundly political. It operates between the individual and society, between self and opportunity. And so in a society in which life chances are unequally distributed, it faces the issue of whether it serves to reinforce such inequalities or reduce them. So he then goes on to develop a really helpful framework for thinking about this. He says, well, the first thing you need to decide when you're doing any guidance with anyone is, are you focused on society or are you focused on the individual? Of course, it's not an either or, you can be focused on both, but let's go with it. And the second thing is, are you focused on stability or are you focused on change? And he then says, that gives you 4 different approaches to guidance. So the first one, which people are probably most comfortable with, and probably many of the guidance courses teach you, is what he calls liberal, non-directive approaches. This is person-centered counselling. So it's the idea that we have a focus on the client. We're only interested in the client. We're not trying to change the client. We're focused completely on the client. And the problem with that is, what if the client's wishes for themselves are very, very shaped and framed by society? Are we going to do anything about that? Well, some people would say, yes, actually, we should try and do something about that. And that moves you into what's called the progressive approach, where we say, okay, we're focused on the individual, but what we want to do is help them to see that they could achieve more. So we want to help them to progress within the social structures. He says then there's another way of thinking about it, and this is actually one that you see quite a lot in policy discourse, which is what he calls conservative or a social control perspective. And he says that's focused on society and on stability in society. So an example of that would be when you get initiatives around things like STEM. So if we're told that we're supposed to get young people to choose STEM options, and that's the focus of career guidance. We're not focused on them as an individual. We're focused on what society needs, and we're trying to get the individual to serve what society needs. And so that gives you that kind of perspective. And then he says there's this other possibility, which is really where I've tried to develop this idea with some of my colleagues, is a more radical idea, which says, okay, we recognize that we could work with the individual to help them overcome the barriers, but we might also want to think about why those barriers are there and what we can do to change them. So that's really what we're going to look at. So that takes us on to the social justice perspective. So has anybody got any kind of more comments or thoughts at this point? How can careers leaders and enterprise advisors track and record data to help prove the case for career guidance? Oh gosh, I'm not sure we can cover that today, but we can perhaps come to that again a bit at the end. So let's go on and look at social justice. So there's lots of people who've talked about social justice in career guidance. I'm not claiming that it's a new thing. I mean, some people would argue that go right back to the beginnings of the field in the early 20th century. Frank Parsons, he was a political activist, and career guidance was one of the things that he thought societies should offer people. And we've seen it in lots of books over the years. Ronald Ray and I produced 2 books over the last few years, Career Guidance for Social Justice and Career Guidance for Emancipation, which started to kind of draw some of this up to date, draw out some new ideas, and put them down into these 2 quite academic books, but hopefully still quite interesting ones. Since then, we thought we really want to engage in practice more. And so we developed a website which is called Career Guidance for Social Justice, and it's available to you there. It's free. We really want practitioners to write articles for it. We've got an editorial board of people who try and encourage people to write articles. We're trying to publish 1 or 2 things on it every week. And it's giving ideas for practice, it's having debating some of the issues that I've been talking about so far today, and it's trying to do it in a sort of non-academic way, a way that is designed for somebody who doesn't necessarily want to write essays and so on, but wants to think about it in relation to their practice. So social justice then is a kind of quite a contested concept, but it's got a long history that's relevant to career guidance. What we were very keen to say is it's not one particular ideology. It's not, well, if you're into social justice, you've got to support this particular theorist or this particular, you don't have to be a Marxist or a feminist or a whatever. You can think about it in different ways, but it's a concern with the collective good and a recognition that there are injustices that need to be righted. And we think it's a good thing that there are debates about the right way to do this. And that's something that we're trying to encourage. So it's not to say that there's one way of doing career guidance, and if you do it that way, you're doing it the socially just way. It's to say there are lots of ways to do it, but these are things that are important to be concerned about. One thing that we have tried to argue is that this isn't just happening at complete random. The inequalities are not just kind of completely by chance. There is a global political system, which is often described as neoliberalism. And I use that word a little bit carefully because I don't know if you listen to Laurie Taylor on Radio 4, but he's banned the use of the word neoliberalism because he says people use it to mean anything and everything. But for me, it's helpful because it recognizes that you can get different political parties, both of the left and the right, in different countries, and they all kind of believe some of the same things. So people, I think neoliberalism has got a lot more contested since 2008. Lots of people have argued about it. It's possible that COVID-19 might make it even more fragile, but it's also possible it will go on as a system. So at the heart of some of this stuff is what Iris Marion Young, who's a kind of a political theorist, she says, well, for every oppressed group, there is a group that benefits from that oppression and is privileged in relation to that group. And that's what we were talking about with the sticky ceilings and the sticky floors, is that oppression is not just something that happens to poor people, it's something that's done by rich people to poor people. There's somebody who benefits from it and there's somebody who loses from it. If you don't have that, then it's not really a form of oppression. And so if we think about our current leaders, who you might want to think about how serious are they about social mobility, and certainly how serious are they about social justice, which is another term that gets thrown around quite a lot. So Boris Johnson's current version of this, he calls it levelling up, and really. What I think he means by that is he's going to direct money to constituencies that voted for the Conservatives in the last election. But the kind of philosophical idea is that they recognise that some people are for geographical reasons or reasons of age or industry or history are disadvantaged, and they need to do something to level that. And that gets back to these ideas of social justice, social mobility, and so on. And this is why I think all of these ideas are relevant regardless of what political party is in, because they all talk about all this stuff. So to finish off, as I've been talking a bit too long, really, I'm going to just give you how we think this can be translated into some sort of practice. So we call it the 5 signposts. And I think it's trying to address the fact that sometimes it feels like, well, what could I really do? What could career guidance really do? You're talking about neoliberalism, you're talking about inequalities in society, oppression, all of these things. What can we really do as career guidance that can make a difference to that? Well, absolutely, we're not saying, it's your responsibility. And if you haven't created the revolution by next week, then what the hell are you doing? We're absolutely saying, there are lots of things. Career guidance can only ever be part of it. But we are saying that it can do something really positive in this space. And what we shouldn't be doing is going out and preaching kind of politics to people and saying, this is, you should vote this way, you should do this thing, and so on. What we do need to be doing is engaging with our clients and helping them to think about issues and try to develop their thinking about their own career in relation to some of these issues. And the 5 signposts give us a mechanism for doing that. So our first signpost is what we call critical consciousness. So we want to help people to understand the world as it is. We want to help people to think about how things work, why things are organized in the way they are, who benefits from it and who doesn't benefit from it, and considering what can be changed and how we might go about changing it. So at its heart, this is just a form of labour market information. This is just a form of understanding the world, understanding that there are different occupations, that some people earn more than others. But it's also adding that extra question, the why question. Why is it like this? Why is it that a banker earns more than a nurse? And often we might feel, well, that's not something that we should talk about. That's something that perhaps gets dealt with somewhere else in the education system. But in the social justice approach, we're absolutely saying, well, let's look at that issue. Why is it that there are some professions that earn more than others? Why is it that certain universities have that graduates earn more than others? And think about those things. And we also might want to think about what's the capacity that people might have to make changes to this. What could be changed? What has to work the way it does? And what might be changeable? A second signpost is what we call naming oppression. And a really good example of that would be the Me Too campaign that we saw, was it last year or the year before, where lots of women stood up and said, actually, I've experienced sexual harassment. And just by naming the sexual harassment, just by naming the problems that they'd experienced, they started to actually enact some kind of change. They started to get people to realize what the situation was and go about changing it. And when you're dealing with a client or a student and they're describing things to you, it's worth exploring with them whether they feel that that is a purely individual problem that they're experiencing or whether it relates to something else. Are you experiencing this because you're a bad worker and you don't ever turn up to work on time or whatever? Is that the reason why your boss is bullying you and doesn't like you? Or is it some other factor? Is it because you're black? Is it because you're a Gypsy Roman traveller? Is it because you're gay and the person doesn't like you? Find that stuff out, because that stuff is actually really helpful in helping people to think about what do I want to change? How do I want to solve this problem in my life, both immediately and in my career and in the career choices that I make? And one of the things that we really try and challenge is what Foucault calls responsibilization, that we take on board the problems of the world as if they're our problems. So we assume every time something goes wrong for us, we assume that it's only because of us. It's just something we've done wrong, we've failed again, rather than recognizing sometimes that there was very little we could have done that would have solved that problem. Our third signpost is to question what's normal. And this is a really great one at the moment, because we're all talking about the new normal, what's normal, what are we going to go back to the way things were before the pandemic? But its fundamentals, it's about saying, what is it in somebody's life and career that they should accept and assume to be normal and conform with, and what is it that they should resist and challenge? And so, an example that I've done some work on is how people dress. And should we be advising people, if these two people came into your interview room, would the argument be, well, take the makeup off, put on a tie, go and get a job? Or would it be to try and talk to them about this? It's not to say that people should never conform. Societies need people to conform. They need norms, otherwise we can't continue, we can't operate together. But I think it's absolutely right in career guidance, because we're thinking about the relationship between the individual and society. It's absolutely right for us to question things and encourage people to think about things quite deeply. We then want to encourage people to work together. So I sort of talked about this already a little bit, but often when we're doing career guidance with people, we only offer people solutions that are individual. We only say apply for a job, take a course, We never say work with other people. We rarely say work with other people, come together. What can you do? Perhaps you're more likely to get a pay rise by joining a trade union and working together to raise issues about low pay than you are to go if you go and get another job. Perhaps that's a better strategy. Perhaps if you're being made redundant, rather than getting another job, a group of you should get together and start your own business as a collective. Maybe that's a better strategy. So we start to say, actually, let's help people to work together. And at its most basic, that can just be saying to people, do you know what? I met somebody last week who had a similar problem to you. Would you like to talk to them? And then linking clients up together to help them on the basis that, you know, a problem shared is a problem halved. And finally, we want to work at a range of different levels. So what we often think of career guidance when we say, when are you doing career guidance? You say, well, when I'm in a room, I've got one person there, having a conversation with them, we're talking about their career. That's when I'm doing career guidance. And we say, yeah, absolutely, that's when you're doing career guidance. But what about if you're in a room with a group of people and you're talking about your career with a group? Yeah, you're still doing career guidance then. And what about if one of those people raises an issue about perhaps a subject that they want to take at school, and you go and raise that and talk about that with the head teacher and say, look, you know, these kids can't take this subject because they're not able to, the timetable's not set up right. So when you go and talk to the head teacher, you're still doing career guidance. You're still helping somebody to develop their career, but you're doing it this time by trying to act on the organization, on the system. And what about if you find that somebody's really struggling to find work because the way their benefits are structured, and you write a letter to your MP and you raise that? Still career guidance. So what we're saying is career guidance is not just what you do at the sort of one-to-one level. Career guidance is everything that you do to try and help people to develop their career. So then this gives us a kind of new way of thinking about it. I'm going to stop there. There's various references. I'll put these slides on my blog over the next few days. But yeah, so to try and sort of sum up really, I think social mobility is a powerful and it's an influential policy idea which career guidance can convincingly connect to and make a difference to. But there are some problems with it. And I suppose it's a nice idea, but is it really practical in the society we live in? And what I'm advocating for is not that we abandon the idea of social mobility altogether, but that we take a broader, more structural approach to social justice as a way forward. And what I've tried to give you at the end here is some ideas about what that might look like in practice, and to give you the 5 signposts as a kind of framework for thinking about that in your practice. So I'm going to stop there because I've whittled on far too much. I'd be really interested in getting some questions. If people would like to put their videos on and ask them in the flesh, or make a contribution, if you think I'm talking complete rubbish, that's absolutely fine as well. We've got a few things in the chat as well, so I'll just have a quick look through there. So what are the ethics of someone trained in person-centered career guidance being more proactive about encouraging new directions and new thinking for clients? I think that's one of the big issues. Is the ethical issues here are quite fundamental. And what Tony Watts said when he wrote originally about the sort of person-centered, the liberal approach, was he said, you've got to be a bit careful that you don't find that a person-centered approach means that you're ultimately reinforcing existing inequalities in society. That people who can't see and can't imagine a different situation than the one they're in, that if they bring you only their current world and you don't expand it at all, then you're really reinforcing the current situation. So his argument will be that we have an ethical duty to try and help our client to sort of, you know, become the most that they can become, to play a full part in society. And so that's I think how we tried to square some of those ethical issues. I think what we're nervous about is that sometimes it can slide into being kind of directive. And I don't think you have to go into the radical direction to do that. But I think we want to avoid, ultimately we're trying to empower people and let them determine the route that they go on. rather than either to say, you know, you've got to go to university because that's the best thing for you, or you've got to do a STEM subject because that's what the government wants you to do, or, you know, you've got to try and go on a protest because, you know, I think you should bring down society. And these are all forms of oppression. So we're trying to always empower people, I think. And Lucy asks here, are there any examples? Well, yes, there are quite a lot of examples of people trying to use more radical social change orientated approaches to career guidance. We've tried to pull quite a lot of those into our books, but also into the career guidance for social justice website. I mean, some of them are very, very small ideas. With communities, trying to help communities to take control of their kind of current situations, to get people to work with each other more. And in a way, what I've tried to pull out in those 5 signposts is some of the kind of techniques and approaches that people are using. But if you want to get into looking at examples, then go on the website. There's quite a few things there. Anyway, would anybody like to chip in now, give us some thoughts? Or ask another question?
I'll speak. I'll say something. Hi there, it's Jackie Phipps here from Suffolk County Council. As always, very thought-provoking, Tristram. And I think, I mean, I work in the education sector, and I think it's quite challenging for careers advisors in schools and colleges who are sometimes just struggling to get any time for careers guides on the agenda at all. Trying to challenging, yeah. And also my other thought was that as a profession, yeah, many of us are oppressed, I would say, yeah, by, we're not, a lot of people feel we're not paid enough, we're not recognised properly for the professional work that we do. And I know there's lots of arguments about, how people are paid, and certainly some of the people I know in my area, they're on really poor salaries. And to then get them to try and, inspire, yeah, people to sort of, and society to change radically, it's really hard.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree. And one of the things I'm really nervous about with this is it becomes like I'm sort of saying, we've got to be heroes, and because really all the things that constrain our clients also constrain us, don't they? And so it's not that it's not that you can expect that career guidance professionals can behave in a way that's kind of completely different and create space that doesn't exist. We all operate within management structures that are constraining. We have limited amounts of time and so on. You have to work within the circumstances you've got, and so I absolutely agree with that. And it's not to say that if you haven't overthrown a government in the last week, then what the hell are you doing? It's yes, we all have to do what we can, and sometimes that's going to be very, very little. It's to give us a bit of a perspective. I actually feel that, if this is going to happen anywhere, then schools are one of the better places for it to happen. I mean, probably the 2 places that I've seen it most commonly people make progress on it would be in schools, where I think there's a potential to make cross-curricular links and to link it to subjects like, to PSHE, the bits of PSHE that used to be the citizenship bits, but also potentially to other subjects, so into history and literature and so on, where there's a bit more space to do some of these things. I think that's one place. The other place where I think I've seen it work is more community-based approaches, so where people are doing like projects with NEETs and things like that, where you're working with people as a community and you're a bit freer. But the idea, I think, is that all of these things have got potential. It's not just, and I think the first thing we need to do is to think, is this something worth doing, and decide ethically whether that's right. The second thing is to give us some ideas about what practice might look like. Then we have to think, well, in the circumstances that we're in, what is the real possibilities of doing that? And sometimes it might not be that many. So yeah, somebody's just raised this issue, which is, yes, exactly a good example of the sort of thing I'm talking about. So lots of initiatives to encourage girls into STEM, but not the equivalents to bring men and boys into health and social care. I think that's exactly the same point I was trying to make about social mobility, is that if you start to say the labour market is unequal, that you have to think about it from both ends. So you can't just say, well, look, it's girls' fault because they're not going into STEM. Because if all girls, or a large proportion of girls, went into STEM, there wouldn't be as many opportunities for boys there. Well, where are they going to go? And one of the reasons why we don't encourage them to go into health and social care or career guidance or any number of other kind of caring professions is that those female-led professions tend to be less well paid, and the government therefore doesn't value them and think they're as important as STEM, which is, not something I agree with. But that's where I think the social justice perspective is really helpful, is that when we start talking about girls into STEM, we need to also be thinking about, what are these STEM careers? Why are they valued? What kinds of things are they doing? Not to dissuade people to go into them, but to try and open up that discussion about what is it you're looking for from a career? What is the values you're looking for, and why might you want to go into things? And I think that's actually a very fruitful area to have some of these conversations. Anybody else got any thoughts that they would like to share? It doesn't have to
I
be
was just going to say that the new CDI framework really fits in well with this, though, doesn't it? Yeah, with sort of helping people look at the wider world and things around them.
Yeah. So we've been trying to do with the CDI framework, we've been trying to, well, I mean, it wasn't explicitly to try and address this, but what we were trying to do was to create, I suppose, a more contemporary articulation of what it takes to be successful in a career. And it's not just about learning a bit about the labour market, but it's also about thinking about things like work-life balance, thinking about entrepreneurship, but also thinking about the sort of relationship between society. And so, yeah, in the latest version of the CDI framework, which we're going to launch after Easter, we hopefully will give a framework which all careers practitioners can use, which is sort of conducive to some of this kind of approach, I think. So what have we got here? Many of the social mobility organisations that careers advisors work with also dictate the eligibility criteria. Yeah, that's really challenging, isn't it? And I think this is where we get into some really tricky areas, is that, I mean, many of the services that we deliver are very highly targeted. And, I do quite a bit of work with the National Careers Service. It's very frustrating that the services they offer can only be offered to certain people. Having said that, the people they have to offer them to are desperately in need of them. And so, I think generally I'm trying to argue for more universal approaches, but that doesn't mean that helping somebody who's extremely, has got extreme deprivation or extreme problems is not a good thing to do. And that is definitely part of the social justice approach, is giving things to people who don't have very much in the first place, even if all you're giving them is career guidance. It's not enough to solve all their problems, but it is a big help, and we've got evidence to tell us it is a big help. Right, more questions here. Rebecca, I agree, draw it back to why the motive all the time, especially with school leaders and CEOs, easy to jump onto the hottest trends. I don't know whether you want to say a bit more about that.
Sorry, I was just getting my mute off. Yeah, it's been so refreshing. Thank you so much, Tristram. And I think with the school leaders and CEOs, but not just in the education sector, I definitely find that there's a real kind of draw for these quick wins and being seen to be doing the right thing when it justice and that critical friend when they're positioning potential projects as to why are we doing this in the context of our own labour market and the society and our children. So yeah, only sort of like 6 months into the role, but I can see so quickly how change can happen at schools. And Jackie, I totally understand also what your comments were in terms of getting people to create change when there is quite a huge volume of oppression within career leader roles, just in how they're seen as well. So yeah, but thank you so much. It's been a brilliant session.
I mean, all of this requires, I mean, and one of the things that I think goes alongside any of this is it ultimately requires increased status for the profession, is that the profession should have, people should have more time to do the work they do. They should have better resources, but they also should have more autonomy to decide their own goals. And I mean, these are things that CDI is absolutely about campaigning for. But just on that, I mean, I'll just give you a personal example where I struggled a bit. So I was on the steering group or the board of the Blackpool opportunity area. So the previous government, Theresa May's government, funded a whole set of areas that were supposed to be the most deprived in the country, additional funding. And so I would travel from where I live in Leicester, which is one of the most deprived areas, in the country. The ward I live in is very highly deprived, not that I'm very highly deprived, but I live in a quite deprived area, and I travel all day to go up to Blackpool, which is equally a very highly deprived area. So do I feel resentful that Blackpool was getting money that Leicester, where I live, was getting? No, I don't feel resentful about that. I think they needed it and they made good use of it, and it enabled them to do things, including a number of career guidance things that I thought were really worthwhile. Am I a bit skeptical about why they got the money as a marginal constituency, which ultimately voted Tory, and Leicester, which is like a solid Labour constituency, didn't get the money? Yes, I am a bit skeptical about that. And so I think we have to be, at the same time as we're thinking about what we're trying to achieve and doing the best in the circumstances we're in, we also have to try and keep an eye on the bigger picture and be a bit critical of what that bigger picture is. Otherwise, we're doing really valuable work, perhaps with people who really need it, but we're not thinking about the bigger picture about who else might need it and who else might benefit from it. And we have to be trying to make that case as well.
Hi, Tristram. It's Darren Stewart here. On that note about who else needs it, something I'm looking at school at the moment is in terms of parental levels of education and where that links into social mobility, and actively looking at supporting those parents with sort of lesser qualifications, less knowledge of labour markets and all those kind of things, and directly working with them to broaden their kind of horizons awareness, help them to develop some networks to support their students as well, their children as well. Where do you see that? Do you think there's ground in that, or is there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, it may not be explicitly kind of framed in the way as social justice initiative, but to me, why it fits with what I'm trying to argue for is that you could, if you viewed that very individualistically, and I've seen schools particularly do this, is that often they construct parents as a problem. So they construct parents as the enemies who are bringing the kids down and they're saving them. As soon as you start to say, well, actually, the parents are our allies, and I'm going to work with them, I'm going to take a more community approach, we're going to bring them in, so perhaps they need some help as well. We start to approach this not from the point of view of the individual and how can we extract them from the systems they live in. We start to work with the whole system, which is their family, their parents, their community. And we start to not just blame those people for letting the kids down, but we start to help them to help the kids. That's exactly right. And I saw I had a PhD student from the Netherlands, and she worked on parental involvement in career guidance. And they brought parents in after school, and they supported the parents to learn about things the parents didn't understand, like, university choice making and stuff like that. And it was really helpful and really effective because the parents want to help their kids. They're not you know, they're not terrible, they're not holding the kids back, they just don't have the tools to help them do it. So if you can help the parents to get that, it can be really effective. And yeah, I think that's exactly a brilliant example of the sort of thing we're talking about.
Brilliant, thank you. Tristram, would it be okay to potentially reach out to you and kind of give us some help and some guidance on setting that up within my school?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can link you up to Anne-Marie as well, who really knows about this parental stuff better than anyone. But also we're always really keen for people to write, once you've got it going, write up a case study for the Career Guidance and Social Justice website about how it went as well.
Brilliant. I'll drop you an email in the next few days then, if that's okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks. Great. Is that about it? I think we've done a good hour and 10 minutes. So
You definitely have, Tristram.
Final thoughts. I think we might be time to finish there. As I say, I'll try and put, so my blog is called Adventures in Career Development, and I've also got the Career Guidance and Social Justice blog as well. I'll put the slides up for this on one or other of those places, so have a look. But yeah, thank you for listening and some good discussion and lots of good questions, and I hope you found some of interest.
And thank you very much, Tristram, for delivering this workshop. It was really insightful, and it's very kind of you to have come and delivered this to us. Really appreciate it. Yeah, thanks so much.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.